Good. So thank you for joining us in this training on secrets on getting your team to write user-friendly documents. My name is Angel Buendia, and I'm the knowledge manager at Scilife, and I'm going to be your host for today's webinar. Okay. So let's get started by making sure that everybody's on the same page. Note that this is a 1-hour training session, and the training is structured into sections. So we have the main section. It is the training itself, and it will take about 45 minutes. And then after the training, we will have a 10 minutes Q&A session, right? So if you have any questions, feel free to type them as we go through the training. You can use the Q&A button. You can find it in the Zoom bar, okay? And this is the right place to pose your questions, okay? So I will select them and we'll make sure to answer as many questions as we can today, all right? Yeah. However, if we don't have enough time to answer all the questions, we are going to prepare a recap page, and this recap page will address all the questions and answers and some highlights about today's training. And also we are going to send you the recording, okay? So now let me introduce today's topic. All right, so we often hear about the frustrations that some leaders and managers in quality systems have about the quality of documents within their company's quality management system, right? And we know that many QA managers are really concerned about how these documents will be defended during audits and inspections. So today, our guest expert will reveal how to improve documentation standards without rewriting them from scratch, okay? And our expert speaker today is Dr. Kathy Walsh. She's the principal consultant and owner of Quality Systems Now, and she's going to guide us through the establishing a writing framework using, a writing framework within the quality management system. And for sure, she's going also to give some practical tips and into transforming documents into assets for your business using plain language. Okay, so my hope in this session is that you will get valuable insights into 3 things. One is identifying the root causes of poor documenting writing, implementing a framework that helps you to avoid the common mistakes we all do, and most importantly, is providing your team with the tools to create compliant and user-friendly documents. Okay, so having said that, I'm pleased to introduce our guest expert, Dr. Kathy Walsh. Hi, Kathy. Nice to meet you.
Hey, Angel. Yes, it's lovely to see you.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
Go ahead with the training.
All right, no worries. Well, it's lovely to see everyone on this training. And like Angel said, we're going to be talking about secrets to getting your team to write user-friendly documents. And so gone too far. The contents of today's training is that we'll talk a little bit about what is this problem around documentation issues. I'll give you a solution to change people's writing behaviour. Then we can talk about how you can actually then put some transformation in place in your own company, so getting your ducks in a row, and some other things that you will need to think about if you want to do some transformation of your documentation. And then we'll have a Q&A session. So firstly, just really, what is this problem? What is the poorly written documents? What am I talking about when I'm talking about these poorly written docs? So I see a lot of companies in their QMS, if their QMS is mature, you've got SOPs and work instructions, forms, policies, etc. They don't integrate well. They're poorly written. Information is buried within the document or within the QMS. And it's difficult to find what you need to do your job. And it's difficult sometimes then to defend at an audit in terms of what your company does. And so it's always great to have a team that can write well. or you can have one person within your team, which is the designated writer, who can write well, and then that then helps your team, but also the company from the QMS point of view. So let's talk a little bit about that problem. But before we do that, we would actually like to do a poll. And so as Andrea does the background on that, you'll start to see your poll question. So how do you think you could engage your team to be better writers of QMS documents? So we'll get you to select one of those. So I don't know, or we've tried before, it didn't work. Maybe train them, maybe enforce it through position descriptions or something like that. Once you've put your poll question in, maybe if you've got something else or something in more detail, put that in the chat, because I can see the chat as well. And so, we can actually see what your responses are. And so that's as that's coming in and we get some responses. So make sure you click on the right one there. I'm going to click on one. I've got the option to do it as well. So I'm going to be part of the numbers. It's going to let me.
Yeah.
Yep.
Training them is leading with 81%. All right.
That's
then
good.
Yeah. I think, yeah. And far away, we have the second one is we've tried before, but it didn't work. So it's 6%. Sorry. And don't know, it's 12%. All right. And the
Okay.
one is
Okay.
a good writer. Okay.
Okay. Well, I'm very pleased to hear that most people suggest that they should train them. There we go. There's the results.
Yeah.
So that's great. So I think if you're in any of those buckets, you actually should help. You should get some help from today's webinar. So I also believe it's a skill, and even with training, not everyone can do it. We're going to touch on that. That's definitely, I agree with that. Having one-on-one sessions to write together, yes, that's good, but how? Okay, so hopefully we're going to answer some of those questions as well. So thank you for putting that in the chat. All right, let's continue on. Oh, so the problem is these documents that are poorly written and can cause problems within your business. They can cause non-conformances. They can cause issues within your within your audit, or can just cause frustration for your people. So what are the root causes? Let's think about what your writers might actually be facing. And when I say writer, I mean anyone who prepares an SOP, a work instruction, or in your team, it might be they might do validation reports, or they might be doing study reports or something like that. So just translate it to whatever is most appropriate in your situation. So what are they facing? Maybe they haven't been trained how to write in plain language. So they've come from university, they've gone through part of their career, never been trained on how to write procedure, how to write in a technical aspect in a company. They might be technically minded. They may not be process driven. So you all know those people who are fantastic. They understand the detail of how a product works. Or how something else within the business actually works. They're great at that, but they're not necessarily the right person thinking in terms of thinking through the process. They don't think linearly through a process from start to finish. So if they change something in the middle, they can't think upstream or downstream. What are the potential impacts of that? Or they may not naturally be good communicators. They may be those technical people, and they might be the introverts who are really, really bright and brainy, but they may not necessarily be excellent communicators. They may not value good documentation. And we see this with some people. It's just not their priority, and they may not just care. So it might be something that they, it doesn't tick their box. It's not something that they really get into. And so they tend to then focus within their job on the things that light them up, and documentation may not be one of those. What else could it be? They might like to write their documents using their own favourite fonts and styles and the way that they want to do it. So personal preference. And so this can cause problems. The document may be reasonably well written, but then it looks different. It stands out from the rest of the QMS. That in itself can also present problems, because information may not be where you expect it to be within the document. what I see a lot, people might actually write the documents for how they believe the reviewer likes it to be written, so that they can just get it done, so they can get it signed, or they have the least resistance. It's the path of least resistance. And so they then just adopt what the reviewer expects it to be written as, and they don't progress any further than that. It might be the situation where you don't have controlled templates, and so that dictate how the document should be written. So that can be an issue, and we'll talk about that in a second. Or they don't understand that a procedure should reflect the process. So that start to finish, stage 1, 2, 3, 4, within a process map then aligns to a procedures headings 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so you get procedures that are not process orientated, they're just like glups of information, and there's a process that's buried within the information, and you've got to kind of pull it out as you read. Or you might actually have the situation where people don't understand the difference between a procedure, an instruction, or a policy, and so they don't know which template to pick, or they don't know how to write because they are written slightly differently, and so they don't understand what those differences are. And there's probably a lot more that can contribute, but they are some of the key root causes that I tend to see in working with clients around good documentation. Okay, what does that boil down to? So people are just being normal people, but they're working in a situation where they don't have an organised, enforced writing framework. And so a lot of these root causes are like a default behaviour. And so I'm going to bring it back to a behaviour because it's a skill, yes it is, but it's also a behaviour. So people within a company, there's all different things going on within that company, so it's definitely a behaviour that's also contributing. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. How do you actually address that today? All right, so the solution. What is the solution for helping your team write better documents? I'm going to talk to you for the rest of this talk. We're going to dive into this framework. So there's 5 keys here, or 5 secrets. And so first of all, templates. So I think in the chat we've got some people talking about templates. So yes, definitely we need approved and controlled templates. You need templates for each document type, and the template should be the guide in terms of styles and all those sorts of things. So we'll talk more about that in a second. The second one here is having a writing training module for your writers. So train them. And so I think I was really pleased to see in that poll that 80% of you selected training. So that's great. You want to upskill your people. So training and mentoring and selecting the right people to write. The other training that you should have in place is the reviewer training. Okay, so you want to have a single source of truth between everyone who's using the QMS, how those documents should be written and presented. And so that single source of truth on how you do that, and just harmonizing what the reviewer understands so that it aligns with how you train your writers. Now, those first 3, every company should have in place. They should put that in place, and you'll see a massive improvement in your documentation if you have that in place as a program. The management and the writing forum, which I'll talk about in a second, are the next step. They are best practice, okay? And so we might scare some people in terms of what we talk about in the detail around management and the writing forum, but understand that is that next step. So what am I talking about when I have management there? So you want top management, your senior execs, to be across what you are suggesting for increasing the usability of your documents. And so that needs to be a positive reinforcement from top down will make this a success. If they are not engaged, then this becomes a little bit more difficult. The management piece is really around how you are managing the writers and the reviewers, and are you going to use existing personnel? Are you going to create a new tech writer role, for example? And what are the reporting lines around that? So we'll dive into that as we get through the training. And the writing forum is really about getting the writers in the same place to promote discussion, to mentor each other, and then they do tend to become champions on good writing practice and documentation within the company. Okay, so let's talk about that transformation. Let's talk about each one of those pieces in a little bit more detail. Okay, templates. So your templates should be the point of control of most of your documentation issues. Obviously, your regulatory and your QMS requirements. So all those things, if you're in GMP, so PICS Chapter 4, all that aspect around documentation, your doc IDs, versions, approval dates, effective dates, change history, everything that you need to demonstrate regulatory compliance as part of your documentation. So they should be embedded within your templates. Document layout needs to be controlled. And so that can include both mandatory and non-mandatory sections. So for example, the mandatory sections could be the front matter. So it might be purpose, scope, roles and responsibilities, and then straight into the body of the SOP, for example. Non-mandatory, it could be if you need an appendix or not, etc., and those types of things. And so, but it needs to be clear within the template what writers can and cannot do and what is expected. Fonts and styles. A lot of people get a bit scared about styles, particularly if they're not a strong Microsoft Word user. However, to train your writers to use styles, embed the styles within your templates properly, makes everything run so much more smoothly if they understand how to use that. If they don't do that, then you're going to have a lot of problems in terms of things looking a little bit different, not quite right. Paragraphing might be a little bit shifted here and on this page and maybe not on that page. And so it's really, really helpful to have those styles actually embedded within your templates. Headers and footers set as standard, obviously. Styles for referencing within the text, etc. So if you have a style guide, I would actually suggest that your style guide needs to be incorporated within your templates. And so then the template functions as a style guide. Okay, so the writer picks up the template that they need for the document. Everything is already embedded within the template. They don't need to go and look at a style guide to tell them how to do something. It's already there. Okay. This is an example of one of our internal SOP templates, which we tend to use as a starting point for our clients. And so you can see I've left the all the paragraphing on, so you can see what I'm doing here. But obviously, we've got our regulatory and QMS requirements embedded in the header. We've got a short front matter, so purpose, scope, roles and responsibilities, and then we are straight into procedure. So those headings there, and then you've got back matter, and you can have as much as you like in that back matter. One thing here with SOPs particularly, keep that short front matter there so that users can get very quickly into stage one. This is what I need to do. If you make that front part of your documents really big, so if you've got the change history at the front and all those sorts of things, then users are just going to flip over it and they're trying to find that, where's that heading one that I'm looking for? Okay, make it as easy as possible in the development and the creation of the document template so that they can do just that. Then you've got your process headings, then you've got your back matter. All the section titles should have a stem sentence. So this is just this first stem that we've got here, and we've got one here as well. And so you're embedding those key pieces of information that your writers they don't need to think. That's just, oh, there it is. I just add my bit into that sentence and away they go. So make it as easy as possible. You can embed instructions. Now, we don't actually have that because our guys are all strong writers. So this is really the bare bones. You could do a lot more within a template. All right, styles. I mentioned those styles. People get very scared of this styles menu for some reason. They don't quite know how it works. And really, it's just you could do a quick training online and understand a lot about it. But if you have these styles already embedded, you show your writers how to use your style function here. then your documents are going to look consistent because everyone's using the same template and the same styles. You immediately get rid of personal preference. So consistent fonts, line spacing, use of bold, all of those things. So, you know, if you've got people who are tempted to use colors, or they overuse bold, or they want to use underlined and italics, all of those sorts of things, then the way that you get rid of that is obviously with a well-designed template. Automatic numbering and easy table of contents, that's what TOC stands for. So if you use one of those, you have to have styles, otherwise that will break. It's a professional look, and it eliminates that personal preference of writers. And that can be a big thing, particularly if people don't understand that, well, they just think that they're doing their best, or mine looks best. But it's just like, well, everyone's looks a little bit different, then it doesn't look quite so professional. Okay. Understand that templates are actually a document type, so they should be controlled within your QMS. They should have a doc number, a version number, etc. Some places will even put a change history in the back on how they actually manage that. And so it ensures that the templates are updated and periodically reviewed with the parent SOP, which is probably the document and record management SOP. And so you update that. You do a review. If there's a regulatory update, for example, and you've got to change something within your templates, then it's all done as part of a change control. It's not done off to the side. Okay, so everything's transparent and compliant. The other thing that I tend to advocate as well is, if you have particularly if you're a large company, someone in QA probably should do a check before the document is actually approved that it's matching the template. Have they used the right template version? Have they used the template correctly, or have they moved things around and done their own thing? And so you want to try and damp that down, because that's again, people not following the template and tending to do their own type of thing. If that happens, it actually should go back to the writer to be corrected. And obviously you want to have a designated folder or location so they can find the templates, the right ones, and you're controlling versions, etc., like you would any other document. So if there's a new version of the template, you pull the obsoleted version so that it is not available for use anymore. And so you just control it like all your other documents. I see a lot of places who don't do this with templates, and they run into problems because the template gets out of control, people amend it, etc. But if it's locked down like any other document, then it does present, it's easier to manage. All right. One thing you must do as part of any template change or any adoption of new ways of working with templates is to let your people know, communicate that to the users. And so that should probably be everyone in the business. They may not necessarily prepare or review documents, but they are using the documents. And so they really should have, at the very least, a communication about what's going on with templates, how they're used, where to find them, what can and cannot be done within the template. This is a little different to the training. We'll dive into that in a second, but it's really that communication piece. And so as soon as you begin changing anything like this on a larger scale within your business, please remember to communicate with your key stakeholders, because they need to be aware of what's going on. Otherwise, you'll end up with angry people down the road. All right. So let's talk about a training module for your writers. So this is what this key is about. So please understand that procedural writing is different to report writing. Okay, so you might have someone who's come from university and they're in their career, several years, 5, 10 years in their career, and they may not have ever been taught how to write a procedure, but yet they're expected to be able to do it. I think this is one of the biggest problems in many companies, is that they don't train procedural writing. They just quite often they just expect, well, they've been to university, they know how to write. Have you seen some of the things that are in a journal article? And some of the ways that they are written, some of them are not very good at all. And so you want to make sure that people have been trained. And so that is the basis of this particular key. A good procedure needs to, it comes from an accurate process map. And so a process map, so stages 1, 2, 3, or process flow, you might call it, then that is really, really helpful, particularly with a complex process, to start with that and then map that across to your SOP, to your procedure. You need to train your writers how to do that. And so that actually may then be, you need to train them on how to facilitate with an SMEs, how to do that process mapping before you can do the actual writing of the procedure. And so that is a really great way to make sure that your procedures always match what's going on in the process. The other thing too is different document types should have different information within them. And so this comes back to understanding the document hierarchy and what information goes in which document. And so this comes into the training that writers should receive. So let's just talk about that for a little bit. The information types that you'll see in procedural type documents are who, what, why, where, when, and how. And so if we then look at our key types of documents that you see in a QMS or a policy, that's your high level, and it's usually what, why, and who. You might get where or when in there sometimes, but it's very high level. It describes the company approach to something or their intent about something. It shouldn't include process. So it shouldn't have procedural things in a policy. It should just be a short, high level document. And it is intended to give a broad approach and intent to what the company is doing. The procedure, though, that's where your who, what, where, when comes into play. And it describes the process. So it's coming from that process map, which means it's completed by one or more groups and it occurs over time. It doesn't include detailed how. It might have a little bit, but not really detailed how. And so that procedure, that is quite different then to your policy, but your procedures then are the documents that many people will be using, particularly at management level and team leader level. Then you get to instructions. This is the detailed how you actually do something. So press this, do that, weigh this. That is the type of information that you see in an instruction. And so it's describing a particular activity, which is usually related to one part of the procedure. And it's completed in one sitting, usually by one person or a team. And so it does need to have a parent because it doesn't tend to stand alone. It doesn't give you that overarching understanding of the process that the procedure does. And then you've got forms. Forms need to be standalone. They need to be self-explanatory to the user. They shouldn't have to go back to a procedure or an instruction to tell them how to fill out a form. The form needs to be self-explanatory. And so it might be that you've got a little bit of instruction within a form so that you can do that if it's a complex form. And because it is also then following as part of a procedure, you should then have a parent SOP, or it might have a parent work instruction if that applies. So that then means that everyone then knows where information goes within each document. So then they know which template to select and they know how to actually draft their process. All right. So developing that plain language writing module for your writers. You tend to do this in parallel to if you're developing template changes, really because they tend to go together. If you're making changes to the template, you need to tell your writers how to use the template. So you train them in how to do that. You train them in process mapping and how to facilitate mapping with subject matter experts. Now, if you have a junior person who is preparing a document, this may be a step for them, and so you may need to help them with that. You might have, for example, maybe their team leader can do the facilitating and then they can then take it further on. But yeah, it's great when you have a tech writer who can then facilitate mapping with subject matter experts, and then they become the driver and push for the change that's going on in the document. You need to define the writer and SME responsibilities, because SMEs, they just come to a meeting and they say, okay, we're going to talk about this process. You need to frame it for them, okay? And so what their responsibility is in the process of updating the document. And so the SMEs, they don't dictate, layout styles or company writing requirements. That's actually the responsibility of the writer, because they've been trained in how to do that. In the same way, the writers are not usually subject matter experts. Sometimes they are, but usually they're not. And so that's what the subject matter expert is for. And you also need to train them how to actually write language. How do you write the content of the document so that it's in plain language and it's user-friendly? Okay. And to do this, if you don't have that skill already on site in your company, then obviously you can engage a professional QMS expert to actually help you in that type of situation. All right. So that was the actual preparers, how you would train them. Let's talk about how you would train the reviewers. So I actually would think it's quite pointless to spend all this activity and training with your writers and not do the reviewers as well, because what then can happen is writers, they create this beautiful document and it's ready. The SMEs are happy with it and it's ready to be reviewed by like a manager, for example. They haven't been trained in the templates. They don't understand plain language. And what they then can happen is they then undo some of those good habits that you're trying to install. So you do need to train your reviewers in not to the same depth, but certainly you need to train them so that they understand what is expected within the document. Also, when the document is being written, obviously QA, they should confirm that the document is well written and according to the template as well. So that would normally happen as part of that approval, because QA are signing off on that. So those two checks and balances are usually really helpful for getting that document through. All right, so what do you need to put in the reviewer training module? So their training is much more high level. It's not an in-depth training, and it just needs to be information so that they understand more than anything. What do they need to review is key. So the technical aspects, obvious errors, those sorts of things. They can also comment that this is not usable. I don't understand this language. That's very relevant. Obviously, the format on how it's laid out, those sorts of things, then they need to understand that the template controls that. And they need to have an overview of what plain language is. So they need to understand active versus passive language, that you can present information in tables just as much as you can present data. And so I do that a lot in my writing, is I'll actually use tables to differentiate different types of information, and it makes the information much more accessible. Like users can quickly go and find what they need because it's actually tabulated as opposed to buried within a paragraph. And you might have the issue where you need to consider who should be reviewing. Now, this may be a problem at your company or it may not, but some reviewers, if they get stuck in old ways, or if they're just, like our writers, documentation is not their thing, then you might need to consider, do they do the reviews, or do we give it to someone else? And then obviously doc approvers, which are QA, they need to review from a compliance and QMS perspective. So they're looking at that overarching, does this document fit in within the QMS? Unless they are also an SME, and many QA people obviously can be SMEs in particular areas of the business as well. So it's important that you train your writers and you train your reviewers. So let's think about the management aspect of writing good documents. So let's think about who should actually be writing. It's important to understand not everyone is going to enjoy writing, and not everyone is able, therefore, to write a good SOP. Most people can write a good work instruction, but an SOP is a little bit different. It's a little bit more of a complex beast sometimes. And so some people are very good at that and others not so much. Some people love documents, others don't. So it's really important to leverage your people's natural abilities. It's actually a little bit painful if you've got someone who is not naturally bent towards writing, trying to force them into writing well and writing good documents. You're just going to frustrate them and you're going to get frustrated yourself. And so if you can avoid that, if you have the option to let people go in their natural inclinations in terms of whether they're technical or whether they're document orientated, then that's really helpful to put people in the right places. All right. How do you find your natural writers? They are actually quite easy to find if you consider what they tend to like. So they are usually those linear thinkers. They can think through a process. They're not necessarily technical thinkers. So they may not get into data and detail, those sorts of things, but they're interested in process. So they're process orientated. They can understand upstream, downstream impacts, etc. Or they can understand if I do this particular thing within this process, within this procedure, that's going to have an impact over here, and I need to consider that when I'm writing my document. If you've got a technical person, that probably does, that connection usually doesn't happen. It's just like this is what's right. This is what the product requires, or something like that. The natural writers, obviously, they like to write reports and they like to be writing rather than actually executing the work. So if you've got someone in your team who, they'll always put their hand up to write the study report or something like that, then they are probably a natural document writer. They could also be good communicators. They're usually, obviously, they're good communicators in a written capacity. They may also be good oral communicators as well. And particularly if they're having to do facilitating with an SME team, etc., then that's a great advantage as well. And you do find that they do get into some of those details. So they get into the styles, and they're good MS Word users. They enjoy language, and they talk to other writers and compare, how they're writing and that sort of thing. So you should understand your compliance. They should also understand their compliance requirements, and they also should have a good understanding of how the business ticks as well. So if you've got people in your team who are like that, they are probably naturally bent towards being tech writers within your business. All right, assigning roles. Now, you could go down the track of actually formalising a tech writer role, or you could train your natural writers, and that just becomes part of their role. So, you've got options here. If you're going to go down the track of say, okay, we're going to create a tech writer within my team, what you don't want to do is add that writing responsibility to an already full-time role, okay? Because it just doesn't work. Because their original role continues, and then they just feel overwhelmed. So what you really need to do, if you're looking to really create that new technical writer role, that needs to be their main primary responsibility, okay? They can still do other things as well, but that writing becomes their primary responsibility. So then each team or department, they can have their designated tech writer, who then manages QMS documents for the team, and then the other team members are the SMEs. So if you want to do that, if you want to segregate a role, then that can work really, really well. I see that work well. My company guys are tech writers, and we do this a lot in terms of we'll come in and set up systems and be the tech writer, and then we train people on how to write. And so when you do have that segregation of roles, it does work quite well. All right. If you do go down this road, there's two ways to do the reporting lines of a tech writer. So they could be embedded within each department or team, and then they report to the department manager. And so pros and cons on this. So they're obviously dedicated to the area, and they understand the processes of that area. And so they can actually then be SMEs as well. One of the cons around this is that the area manager then is the one who is dictating, directing what's going on. And so that may not be prioritizing that QMS documentation. Okay. If you have tech writers are all then reporting to QA, so they're part of QA, and then they then assist other departments. So there's a dotted line to a department manager. Then the pros of that obviously is that the QA has the priority there, and the compliance and QMS is the priority. The cons might be that they may not have that really strong knowledge of the particular area that they're helping, so they can't function as an SME, but they then should be talking with the knowledgeable people within that department. I've seen it done both ways. It kind of does depend on the situation. So each company is a little bit different. All right. So if you want to onboard professional tech writers, so people like myself and my team quite often will go into a project, so an implementation of software, those sorts of things, and there's a massive QMS impact on those sorts of things. So you can manage this in different ways. You can onboard those, and they'll either manage the technical writing, which is what my team often do, or you can actually upskill personnel in tech writing as well. So there's pros and cons around this. So the industry, you can train your industry specialists, so your own staff. And so the pros around if you do that is that you retain that industry knowledge. They have that already. They understand the company. They understand the culture, etc. And so that's a really good long-term benefit for the company if you are actually training up people who are already in the business. The downside is it can actually be a significant initial outlay of your effort and resources. So it takes a bit of an effort to get them there. You may need to backfill a role if they are moving into a full-time tech writer role. Then that could actually be something that you need to think about. There's another role that you need to resource. And they might need some ongoing support from management for the technical writing role. So as management, over time, what can happen in these types of situations is management changes or management are not fully engaged with this type of activity. And then what can happen is the tech writer role gets pulled or made redundant, for example. So that can actually happen as well. You want to make sure that your senior leaders understand the benefit of actually having tech writers in the business. If you want to onboard a technical writer, they are going to bring immediate increase to your skill set. Okay, so they bring all the writing skill and everything that comes with them. So there's an immediate change in your document, and there's probably an increase in the volume of documents that go through. And this is really good short-term benefit, and it's really good for project work. One of the downsides are, so if you pick the wrong tech writer, they may not have the industry knowledge. And that actually, I think that is one of the biggest issues with onboarding tech writers, is that they don't understand GMP, they don't understand the regulations, etc. And so that can be a game changer. So you need to pick the right one. And so that can be a problem because sometimes the right one is busy. And you may not be able to get to them either. So pros and cons, again, depends on your situation and what you're doing as well. All right, let's talk about the writing forum and getting some momentum with new tech writers and changing your documentation. So tech writers, they do like to talk about different ways of presenting information and making process improvements. And so you want to encourage that interaction. And I kind of remember about 8 years ago, I was on a project. It was a large software implementation, and we had about 8 tech writers who were working with different teams within that project. And we were all seated in one large building, one large room. And the level of detail that some tech writers would actually talk about, it's just like, what's the spacing that you've got between the bullet and the stem sentence, or, what's the paragraph? It's really, really detailed stuff that they were really getting involved in. But what actually happened was you actually found that the newer technical writers came up to speed much quicker because they were in the same room and hearing all this conversation about how to use styles. And, if the template broke, they immediately knew how to fix it and all of those sorts of things. And so they became champions throughout that project on the best way to actually write documents. And so they also were becoming champions then of plain language as well. And so they become the go-to people for all the documentation issues. QA don't have to, sometimes QA get bamboozled by all of these questions. How do I do this? How do I do that? But sometimes when you've got a tech writer who can do this, they can fix templates that might break. They might be able to fix formatting of someone who can't write, but is a technical person, and they can fix all that. And QA can just go, go talk to the tech writer. They'll fix it for you. So that is an option as well. So you're getting momentum going. And so then they do become facilitators of the change, and they are involved in process improvements. So the value of a tech writer is, particularly when they understand the nuances of the regulations, is really, really high. But then if you couple that, if they understand lean and OPEX knowledge, then they are an absolute company asset. I can't say that any greater. They really are very, very helpful, particularly if you're doing transformational projects within the business. These guys always get then pulled onto the project, and they're then working on those, to bring in that new knowledge or that new project. All right. So you want to foster the interaction between people who are writing. They may not be formal technical writers if you're not going that far, but even if you're preparers of your documents, they should have the ability to interact with each other and talk about how they're documenting things. So a really good way to do that is to seat them together, particularly initially. And then they then start talking and cross-checking each other's writing. They talk about those details around Microsoft Word, and they then start to learn off each other. And what you find is their writing becomes more consistent. So everyone's writing then starts to look very, very similar, as opposed to, in some places you can go in and you read a document, oh, I know who wrote that because of the way it's written. You can also seat your tech writers, particularly after you've rolled out this type of training and it's been established. You can then seat them within their department. So then they're at the coalface, they're understanding what's going on within their department that they're supporting, and they understand those priorities and pressures, and you should also then encourage them to continue to interact with their other tech writers who are involved in the QMS documentation. So are you ready to transform your documents? So there's a few things you probably want to think about. I think what we've talked about so far is not rocket science, but it's just getting those ducks in a row. So let's talk about, if you want to implement something like this, you need to think about your senior leadership. So they need to be involved, and they need to approve the approach, really. Particularly if you're going to go down to a formal technical writer role, you need to resource that role, and so they need to be okay with that and how you're actually going to roll that out. If you're not going that far, if you're just going to say, okay, we're going to train and implement writing training for our writers and our reviewers, and we're going to clean up our templates, your senior leadership still needs to be involved and having positive reinforcement from them to say, yes, we're following the template and we expect you to do this, etc. And so that's always helpful. If you're going to execute anything like this, it needs to be like a transformation project, because it is a transformation project of your QMS. So you need to think about, put your project management hat on, think about who are my key stakeholders, and top management are one of the key lot of stakeholders. What are their concerns? How do I address the concerns? Putting in a communication plan, etc. So it's not just about doing templates and training modules. It's really thinking about that next level and communicating and managing with your stakeholders. Expect it to take time. Okay, a minimum of 6 months to embed with key writers and reviewers, and probably 18 months before the company kind of really gets it. Okay, and so don't get frustrated if it's not happening, really, really quickly. It does take time because you're trying to change people's behaviours, and that does take time, and it needs positive reinforcement. And it will require that senior leadership support to maintain that framework and not slip back into poor habits. Okay. So if you need more help, you can reach out to me. There's a lot of this information and more within my book. We've got a course, etc., and you can check that out if you need to. Please have a look. But I think now, Angel, we are ready for our Q&A session.
That's right. Yeah, brilliant, Kathy. Thank you very much for this training. And now let's go to the Q&A session. Okay, so now it's your opportunity to ask as many questions as you want. You can use the Q&A button below the Zoom bar. All right. Let's do our best, Kathy. So let's move on to the first question. Let me check. We have a question, in the chat from Johnny. Is it a requirement to include a process flow in an SOP?
I would actually say no, it's not an absolute requirement. I think the process flow is really helpful for establishing the SOP. So what are those stages? If it's complex, so if you've got lots of branches and decision points and things like that, it can be really helpful to have that. You might put it in the appendix. Some places actually put it up front so that people see it as an overview. And I think that's fine, depending on how you've structured your template. I would say don't do it every time. If it adds value, use it. If it doesn't add value, don't. And it might be if you've got a complex process, you might have a training module that goes with that process, with that procedure. You might want to put the process flow in the training module as opposed to in the SOP. So there's swings and roundabouts depending on what it is and who you're actually trying to train.
Sure. Good. Yeah, we have another question from Johnny. How do you manage documents that are owned between departments, different departments, right? The same document.
Yeah. Okay. I see. So you've got one document where you've got several departments that input to the same document. Is that what the yeah? Okay. That's fun. I would recommend that all documents should have a single owner. And so one person, probably one department needs to be the owner of that document. The other stakeholders, I guess, the other SMEs also need to contribute to it. Sometimes that's hard because no one wants to put their hand up to say, yes, we'll own it. And I think that's what it kind of comes down to. Maybe QA gets involved and says, okay, we need owners for everyone. Who's putting their name up? And then if no one puts their name up, then maybe just nominate and someone actually does that. The trick is, I guess, if one of the other departments wants to update it, they should be able to do that, but then they still need to engage with the owner to make sure that they're happy with that. So it's a little bit of negotiation, and that's where your SME team comes in. So you want an SME from each of the key stakeholders in the conversation.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Good tip. Thank you. Let's go to the questions from the Q&A session. From the Q&A button. We have a question. What's the difference between purpose and scope? This sometimes gives a little misunderstanding. What information put in the purpose and what information do we have to put in the scope?
Yeah. And some places combine them. So they'll just call it purpose and scope, or they might just call it purpose and they actually have both. But I actually think the purpose really is what is the purpose of the document. So this document, this SOP describes the requirements for material management at this particular site. It follows this particular regulation, yada, yada, yada. And that's the purpose. And it only needs to be a couple of sentences. The scope might be this document applies to, you could have these departments. This document applies to these sites in terms of scope. And so your scope is who's involved and that can be in terms of people, departments. It might be like, it could be aspects of the process, etc. So I think it doesn't have to be big. They're just small. It's a couple of lines for each. And it doesn't have to be a long paragraph or anything like that. It's just like keeping it short and sweet actually means it's easy to write these sections.
Yeah, both give clarity, and obviously we have to include them into the document, both of them, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
We have a question from Sarah regarding slide 18. She says, why and in which cases is a separate instruction? I understand it's a work instruction necessary.
Yep.
Yeah, this
Ah,
is a typical thing. Yeah, sometimes, yeah, people include the instruction
when
into
do I,
the same
yep.
SOP. No?
When do I need to break out to a new work instruction from the SOP? Yeah, very, very good question, very common question. So I actually think if you've got more than about more than half a page of that how information, and it's starting to become, your SOP then starts to get really, I'll call it chunky. You're getting buried in that detail. That's the time that you actually need to think about a new work instruction. If you don't want to break to a work instruction where you've got only half a page of detail. You probably want about at least a page, probably two, of that information, of that how information. What you can also do is have a single work instruction, and it includes different aspects of that how information that's coming from a procedure. So if there's a lot of how information within a procedure, but it's spread across multiple sections, you can combine that and put it in one work instruction if it makes sense for the user. So you need to think about the audience of the documents as well. So if you've got, because there's nothing more frustrating for a user to be reading a procedure than having to jump out into a work instruction, then having to jump back. That's annoying. And so you don't want to do that either. And so it's really just thinking about who uses the document, how they're going to use it. But if you've got, I'm kind of thinking equipment is a classic. So how do you set it up? How do you, do a first run? How do you do in-process checks? How do you use it? How do you clean it? How do you shut it down? That could just be one work instruction. Okay, but you've got all these different sections in it. Okay, so think about who uses what you're trying to generate in that work instruction.
Right. Yeah. And regarding that, between the documentation of general processes and equipment, there's a question here that asks, do you suggest to have a dedicated writer only for writing procedures and a dedicated writer for writing other types of documents like, yeah, such as equipment, qualification systems, equipments, and so on, or the same person
Yeah.
do the same?
Yeah, I would have well, it would depend, it might depend on how you structure it. I could see it would work either way, but normally what I see is the tech writer is involved in the procedural documents. And so they're looking at the procedures, work instructions, forms, policies, anything. It could also be a user manual that you're generating internally. So they would deal with that. Whereas you might have equipment specialists who are doing the validation. So they're doing the IQ, OQ, PQ, or something like that. And so I see those as different people because they tend to think differently. So your equipment person is the technical person and they're diving into specifications and criteria and all of those sorts of things. Whereas your tech writer is thinking about how do I use this? Who's going to use it? How do we train them? All of those sorts of things. And so it's different thought processes.
All right. Okay, we have one more minute. So let's just yeah, do another one, the last one. So regarding the reviewers, does independent reviewers need to be in the review process? I mean, I understand it's from a different department or different department or from the same department. What do you recommend?
I think if they're a stakeholder in the process that's been described by the document, it's helpful to have them, because if they're just using, like they might be just using one part of the process, like one section, the front or the end or something like that. And so their input is still valuable, even though they may not own the document or they may not have most of that activity that's in the process. They still should be involved, because otherwise, if you exclude them, then there's going to be a problem with their other processes interfacing with the one that you're trying to update. And so you want to make sure that everything integrates. So processes talk to each other. You never duplicate information, but they need to align so that you don't have it. Otherwise, you create process hotspots. And so then people make mistakes and things go wrong and all those sorts of things. So you need to make sure that if someone does something within that process, it's always good to have them involved. The other thing is you don't want to cast of thousands. And so if you've got a huge SME team, it's really hard to get reviews done. And so that's difficult. So,
Yeah,
you need to weigh that up.
yeah, it makes a lot of sense, Kathy. Yeah. Sure. Okay. So, unfortunately, it's time. So, yeah, we should make the wrap up. So now I want to appreciate everybody for being here and for this participation and asking those interesting questions. Um, Special thanks to Kathy. Thank you very much for this training.
Thank you for having
And
me. Yep.
yeah, and remember that we are going to prepare a recap page with all the questions and answers, and you will also receive the recording. All right. So thank you very much for being here. I hope to see you in the next training session. And goodbye.
Awesome. Thank you, Angel.